Hello, I'm Noel Kingsbury and I'd like to welcome you to this My Garden School course on planting the Piet Oudolf way. We're at Hummelo in the eastern Netherlands and I'd like to introduce Piet.
Good morning, I'm Piet Oudolf. We own this garden. This is the garden where we try all the perennials we get in and also try combinations that we can use in our design.
So Piet, in our conversations over the years, you've always emphasised structure as the key element in planting design, haven't you?
In a way it is, because colour is just there for a few weeks, and that's why I think structure is so important. Look at that Veronicastrum. Flowers in June, July, and it's still there, and it will be there in the winter as well. So I think structure is a key element in design.
Yes, I mean this is a particularly good example because I just love the way it has this upright thrust for months after it's finished flowering.
Yeah, it turns into a sort of, gets a little bit of autumn color, then turns into brown and will be there all winter long. And I think in contrast, for a garden it's very important that there's something to see in the winter. I think that is, for me as a designer, important that the garden keeps on going.
So I think we could define Veronicastrum virginicum as a really good long-term structure plant.
That's true, and I think and also vertical. So if you have a lower planting, it races out of that and gives some punctuation in the landscape.
Yeah, yeah. What about the miscanthus grass behind, which I think is Malapartus, isn't it?
That is Malapartus, one of my favorites. It starts with a beautiful brown color, and what you say, color is important for a particular moment in the time, but you see it's more ornamental, more architectural. So I wouldn't use it too much in the garden, but I think as a ornamental feature, as we have in the garden, it does great work and stays till when you cut it off.
Its season is later than the Veronicastrum, perhaps in late summer, but it will carry on looking good until, well into the winter, I would say.
No, yeah, through the winter. It depends on all circumstances. If you have a storm in the winter, snowstorm, then it probably will break or whatever, but can also has its own charm.
And what about this Deschampsia grass?
Yeah, also grass that flowers early, but it starts from but you see the inflorescence, the dead structure or the skeletons stay, and also till deep in the winter. So it's a plant you can use for landscaping.
But I would say this has a shorter season because already now we're beginning to lose some of its beauty.
Yeah.
Often find by early winter it's looking a bit tatty. So perhaps something that we could define then as a medium-term structure.
Medium-term, but if you see it in masses, then it works. As an individual plant, it still can stand out because it's almost wide.
Yes, yes.
And I think that still has something, I noticed. So you can say in between, of course, but on the other hand, it's also a plant you don't use in masses because it can fall out, you know. So as a single plant, I prefer to use it. And but what you say, you know, it depends on the context, whether you will see it for the whole winter or not.
Yeah, yeah. Now what about the Persicaria over there, which is a fantastic plant for filling space and has really long flowering season, but you don't really rate that as a structure plant particularly, do you?
No, the first night frost and it collapses.
Right, so a bit of frost, boom, it's useless, isn't it?
Just like hosta.
Yes. And so we could say that was a short-term structure plant.
Short-term structure plant. It's imposing, if you can say that, through the summer because it flowers and flowers and flowers. Beautiful with other plants, landscaping. Private garden can become a little bit too big, but you know, for landscape it's an ideal plant. It's long-lived.
And I like its combination of the spikes and then these broad leaves. I mean, I think they're very useful in visual terms.
Yeah. No, that's true. And many colors today, so you can have a white one or a pink one.
Yeah.
And I think that is also, the variation is good, that it's a plant for every garden.
Yeah. You've got an inula at the back there, but they tend to be terrible flowers in my experience.
Yeah, they flop, you know, they're great when they flower because this inula, the Sonnestraal has this beautiful drooping leaflets.
And I love the leaves, actually. The leaves are really big.
But in the winter it comes back again, you know, then you see the seed heads, and that makes it, now they look terrible, but I think all depends on the season and how wet it was. This is one of my favorites. Now you see the grass, which is everlasting.
Yes, I finally got some. I finally got some to flower at home. They're slow with us, but they are beginning to flower now.
Yeah, you can't say it's useless because Helios, they grew them in 1 year till flowering.
Yeah, they must have had them in a polytunnel or something.
They have a polytunnel. They had a good grower. They fed them like crazy, of course.
Yeah, so it can be done then. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, Pete, so we got the Veronicastrum here again.
Yeah.
What about the grey-leaved
Baptisia? Yeah.
Baptisia leucantha?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I love it. You see the grey, but the leaves turn into black in the winter, which is a great contrast against the other dead material.
So that was flowering, white flowers in July?
Yeah, June, July.
Yeah. So the flowers have long since finished, but we've got this fantastic mound of grey foliage for the rest
and normally
of the year.
they have great seed heads, but I don't know who took them off. Maybe the mice, you never know. And,
over-enthusiastic mice. Yep. And across here, we've got this grass again, the light Deschampsia cespitosa, and the heads of Astilbe chinensis taquishii. And I think that's a great combination, isn't it?
You know, both out of flower, but together you see that plants, when they get out of flower, the one gets brown, the other one gets blonde, the other one yellow. So there's always something to experience. And what I say, color is not the most important thing for plants, but you see that color can be important anyway later in the season.
Yes, and the contrast here, contrast in form and in colour. So you've got this light, wispy grass, and then there's much more defined seed heads of the Astilbe. I think that's really effective.
Yeah, and in the winter it gets stronger. You know, everything gets brown and blonde, and that works as a very strange landscape.
And finally, this geranium here, it's clearly doing quite a good job ground covering. But would you even call that a structure plant?
Not at all, no, it's a filler plant. It's a plant with no structure. It flowers over a very long period and fill in gaps, so I would say you can use it as a filler between the other taller plants.
Yes, but realising that this is something that has very little structure, and once it's finished flowering, to be honest, it can look a bit of a mess, can't it?
I think that's true, you know, but what I say, normally we lost some plants during the winter, but I think this replaced the plants for a long term. It flowers almost all summer.
Yeah. In talking about plant structure, it helps greatly if we can talk about some basic categories. We're going to start with one of the most obvious, which is spikes and spires. So let's look at this Veronicastrum. And over here, the Sanguisorba canadensis. So I'm taking this Veronicastrum virginicum as an example. What do spikes and spires mean for you?
Yeah, they have this optimism of going upright to the sky. It lifts up out of all the other plants. I think that is mostly what it is. It's also, without knowing, you feel there's something dynamic about them.
Yes, and I think particularly for repetition, the upright thrust is very, very effective.
And there's so many upright forms, so there's not only one spike form, there's so many spike forms that you can choose from them. It's,
yes, yes. So the next category we're going to look at are what we call plumes. An example is this Miscanthus Kleiner-Fontana here, or the Filipendula rubra magnifica. So, Piet, first of all, how would you define a plume?
Yeah, they're not dense, they are a solution between density and non-density, so they're intermediates. So they can break up a solid planting by being more transparent. And they also have this quality of being more, sort of, you have the idea that it is a plant that feels free among all these other plants.
They're less emphatic than spikes, a gentler form.
That's true.
So, Piet, you talk about scatter plants. Now, how would you define a scatter plant?
Now, it's a plant we need and don't need at the same time. It fills in between other plants, it's just for short seasonal flowering, can be an edging plant, can fill gaps between the more important plant, the more structural plants. I think that is what we call a scatter plant. Important and non-important. Important because it can add that little bit of more that you want in color, on the edge, and just to fill in black soil.
An example would be something like this, Saponaria max Fry. You don't really notice it before it flowers, you don't really notice it afterwards, but when it's in flower it's just adding that extra little splash for that season. Another example might be the Geranium Soboliferum over there, which is just a month or so of colour. Here we've got Sedum matrona. Now, how would you define this flower structure?
This is a flat form of an umbel, but what I said is the most gentle form and most easy to read form in plants. So now it's in contrast here with Erentium, and this plant flowered in June, and June is of course a time that we have very little flowering plants, but this plant performs till next February, till we cut everything back. The most significant of all the umbels is Eupatorium, because it's a tall plant, very could be dominant, but never too dominant.
So there's a terrific range of spikes and spires, really tall, narrow ones like Actea.
Yeah, there's Pritchard Giant, yeah, beautiful, tall and erect, 8 foot tall.
Softer, fluffier ones like Sanguisorba canadensis.
5 foot.
And then there are those that sort of grade into plumes. Heuchera vallosa and Astilbe. Which Astilbe is this?
Visions in pink.
Visions in pink, obviously now in its seed head phase. And there are spikes and spires that tend to come in multiples, like Veronica longifolia and
Persicaria
amplexicaulis. Particularly useful are these very stiff, erect Stachys officinalis seed heads And these will stand really well through the winter. With umbels, fennel here, Feniculum vulgare, the classic flat-topped umbel. And then you can have umbels that are more rounded.
Eupatorium, Maculatum, Atropurpureum.
Achilleas, these are some of the best flat-topped, harder looking umbels.
Yeah, this is a small example.
Very loose umbel, so again grading perhaps into the plume. That's Aster ambellatus, isn't it?
Yeah.
And phlox flowers, again from a distance, have this umbel shape. Plumes, we talked about these before, didn't we? Filipendula rubra and Miscanthus.
Eupatorium, Maculatum, Atropurpureum.
Achilleas, these are some of the best flat-topped, harder looking umbels.
Yeah, this is a small example.
Very loose umbel, so again grading perhaps into the plume. That's Aster ambellatus, isn't it?
Yeah.
And phlox flowers, again from a distance, have this umbel shape.
And I think they mix with the surrounding plants. They are, yeah, what I say, the color also works with it. I think an ideal plant to loosen up
Your border. I mean,
your border.
to loosen. When there's some breeze, they're always in movement, aren't they?
Yeah.
That sense of movement is very important in the garden.
Yeah. But you see, the point that they're floating is if they're loose from their stems and from their bases, that is also one thing that is attractive. This is Molinia transparent, and you can see when you walk around it, you discover your plants that are hidden behind them, because it's completely transparent. It works like a curtain or a screen. I think that is yeah, what I think why we use this plant for. It's quite huge, but it's also
Which
beautiful.
Is
Calamagrostis brachytricha.
Calamagrostis brachytricha, particularly soft, very effective plume shape. So now we're going to talk about balls and buttons, and here we've got Echinops retro with this almost perfectly spherical globe. So how long will this last?
I think another 3 weeks, and then they fall off, or the birds have taken them. But I think it's very interesting because after this you get these little buttons, which still are attractive in the winter. Maybe not at this moment, but late in the winter everything becomes more attractive than it probably would like at this moment.
So here we've got Sanguisorba tenuifolia purpurea, which is another example of one of these ball or button shapes.
And you can see they're very important for gardens. It looks if they're floating through your planting, and I think they mix with the surrounding plants. They are, what I say, the color also works with it. I think an ideal plant to loosen up
your border.
Your border.
When there's some breeze, they're always in movement, aren't they?
Yeah.
That sense of movement is very important in the garden.
Yeah. But you see, the point that they're floating is if they're loose from their stems and from the bases. That is also one thing that is attractive. This is Molinia transparent, and you can see when you walk around it, you discover your plants that are hidden behind them because it's completely transparent. It works like a curtain or a screen. I think that is what I think why we use this plant for. It's quite huge, but it's also on itself very characteristic.
I can see through. I can see some Actaea flower heads. I can just work out that there's some dark asters there, and as I come round, you can see things more plainly. So it's acting as like an intermediary and making the garden more mysterious by revealing, by gradually revealing something. Yeah.
That's why we use it for. So it's also a plant you can use in masses as well. You know, it's in fields, but we use it here in the garden as a single specimen, just to reveal plants when we walk around them. It reveals the landscape in a very soft way. So you come past these plants, and then it opens up, but in a way that you really love it. Huh?
Yeah. So Molinia transparent.
That you really love it. Huh?
Yeah, so Molinia transparent, it's like a veil. The garden and the surrounding landscape. And the Sanguisorba too, all those little buttons in the air, it helps to veil what's behind, and we're gradually revealing the surrounding countryside. It's late summer, autumn, daisies become particularly important. Aster divaricatus, Aster twilight, and then over there, flowering for a good few weeks, Coreopsis tripteris. So what's special about daisies for you?
Now, first they flower late, and they have this aspect, you know, that because of many have the blue color, so they really point out. A lot of plants are like the Coreopsis are yellow, and yellow is of course not always appreciated in gardens. I like it, especially in bigger landscapes, but in asters and the daisies there's so much choice that I think that's one of the aspects that we have it like it in our garden.
And I think it's a very cheerful shape. People respond so well to this.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. We are so used to the aster shape that we don't give it that we pull it out as a particular form. As a form like buttons and whatever spikes. The daisy shape is a form that is so particular that we give it a design, make it a design form.
Okay, here we've got Echinacea purpurea, which has become one of the most popular perennials. Good thing or bad thing?
Beautiful plant, overused nowadays, I think, short-lived, but it's a big bee attractor. It's a beautiful plant to combine with. It has all the purpose you need in the garden, but it's tricky. You can lose it. It can stay there for 2 years, sometimes 3 years, and if you have space it can seed around, but it is short-lived. But what I say, it's a beautiful plant, became over-popular more or less, but still very usable.
Once it dies back, these seed heads are a good, nice.
Yeah, they become nice and black, and I think it's also a very good seed provider for birds in autumn and winter.
And so many kinds of asters. The aster twilight we've seen.
Yeah.
This is a seedling of violetta, showing you some of the colour range of asters.
Coreopsis tripteris, beautiful. I like it in a way because after flowering, these little buds become so nice in the winter.
And they're quite an airy shape, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
This is Rudbeckia subtomatosa, Henry Eilers, and the leaflets are a sort of spoon form, which make it more attractive than the normal species. And Helenium loisterweek, which is also the smaller petals, spoon form, beautiful color, brown, yellow, and yellowish, and one of my favorite Heleniums.
And then you have those daisies which don't have the outer ray florets. Instead you have these sort of fluffier buttons, such as Venonias, fantastically good butterfly plants, aren't they?
Butterfly plants, and maybe too tall for your garden. They're 6 foot, 8 foot tall they can be, but nowadays there will be shorter forms in the market in the future, on the short term. I think they are about, I can call a name Southern Cross and Iron Butterflies. They are lower and more suitable for your garden, but for landscaping these are great.
And very, very long-term plants, aren't they?
Yeah, live very long, and they're called ironweed, so you know, hard to kill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in talking about balls and buttons, here's the ultimate ball of perfect spheres of Echinops retro. And monadas we would normally grow for flower colour, but
the buttons, the balls are great in the winter, also for insects. There's little seeds in it.
And sanguisorbas have perhaps the ultimate button ball shapes, a lot of variation. This is quite an elongated one, but many varieties are much more globular.
Yeah, they're all sizes. They're from 5 foot, 6 foot till 3 foot tall, so for all purposes in your garden.
So that button ball shape often becomes more important after something has finished flowering, like with this Japanese anemone.
Yeah, and the seeds, when they got ripened, so they get bigger and they explode into beautiful little silky seeds.
And even hollyhocks, levitera, these mallows, once they finish flowering, we have these ball-type seed structures.
That's true. Also good insect feeders, bird feeders. Yeah, what I say is that this plant, the Arrangement Viganteum, that flowers in June and you see it's still there, green even, and I think that lasts till next year. You have to take it out of your garden, and it structurally and texturally it stays interesting, and there are more plants like that. What I say, important is that a plant performs over time, and time I mean seasons. Especially there are plants like these, they perform 9 months out of 12. Now, I would say 7 months out of 12, and I say it's important for your garden to keep it interesting. Another one is oregano. You see this blackish, grayish seed heads. It's another plant that stays interesting.
At this time of year, it doesn't look very much, but in winter weather, these little oregano seed heads can really glisten.
That's true, and often you want to take it out because they always start to fade in a moment that the garden still is rich in flowering. So I can imagine people say we take it out, but leave it, accept it for a little bit longer, and then it comes to its right. I think that is important. You have to learn to look and think in time.
And all these clematis varieties that have these rather wonderful seed heads, give it another whole second season.
This is recta, clematis recta, a species. We found it in Croatia, in the Alps meadows. Beautiful black seed heads, and it's available, I think, in cultivars. But this is just an example of how a plant can be more interesting after the flowering period.
So always thinking about what happens after flowering, how much good structure that plant has after that main season.
So that was a guide to some of the basic plant structure categories that Piet uses in his design work. We very much look forward to seeing your assignment, to see how you are applying these categories to some of the plants that grow in your region.